Bit late for coffee? No. Why would it be late? I just made myself a fresh one. I haven't had a coffee today, so. Hello, Archie. Have you heard the track in the event room? Is that like the placeholder one? 7 PM here? Yeah, it's 8 over here as well. It's even an hour later. Heyo Dennis, heyo Billborb. Sorry, I'm still getting set up as well. Because we have one late entry. So I'm just setting that one up currently. Let's see. Do I need... So, should be good. Hello, Pyrex. Good to see you here. How are we all doing? Damn, different breed of human. I don't know. Yeah, I kind of drink like coffee whenever I want to drink it. So I didn't have one today. It's also because I'm still a little bit sick. So I'm taking it super easy. So yeah, that might also be the reason why. But otherwise, I would probably drink like one coffee in the morning. And that would be it for the rest of the day, I think. Most times. There are exceptions, but... Let's get this file organized. I guess this will have to do. It's a little bit all over the place, but... It's all good. Okay. Hi Eli! Hi Anchor! Good to see you all here. How's everybody doing? It's a little bit darker than usual as well. Because I turned down the lights. Because a little light sensitive as well, I think. Like, whenever I get sick, especially when it's just like, I don't know, like your regular flu, right? Like your seasonal flu, like it affects my eyes really badly. So that's why we're in a little bit of a darker environment now. Yeah, how is everyone doing in the chat? Did everyone have a good day? Thank you for asking, Bulborb. My day has been pretty good. I have a couple of updates that we've done, right? From people that are in the community already. You've seen that I did like an announcement that I'm looking for people to help me test the website. I've been working on the website and like getting user accounts set up and all that kind of stuff to make it a little bit more efficient to give you your goodies, right? Than having to go to like a separate website and all that kind of stuff. So currently, if you want to help us out, feel free to send me a DM, and we can give you access as well. It will be awesome. Yeah, we've been doing that, and we also have our newest workshop online as well. So that's been edited. It's the one with John Arlano about like modular kits. So if you're doing anything modular, feel free to check that out. You have to sign up for the workshop access tier currently. Otherwise, it will be available to everyone in like, let's say 30 days from now. Yeah, that one was really awesome. Like I had to at the same time like organize like the kickoff for the team challenges that we run, right? And I was kind of a little bit sad by it, you know, just because it was such a good workshop, even though like it was a lot of stuff that I kind of knew about already, right? But yeah, still really awesome to see though. Hi Pyroxellos. Hi Designer. Good to see you both here. Yeah, that was awesome. Like I'll see if I can give like a sneak peek here. So if we go to the overpaint screen in just a second. Let's go here. So let me just turn this down a little bit. Oh, it looks so nice on full screen. So yeah, this is like the full workshop that we did, like the last one. So cool, like going over like the entire kit creation. Basically taking us from like the beginning, what the advantages are, the complexity of modular kits, organization and kit preparation, and then going into like a whole bunch of like demos to showcase like how you should build like modular kits. Super interesting. It's always interesting. It's been a while, honestly, since I did like a modular kit myself. So it was really interesting to see someone else do it and then learn from the ways that they would do it as well. Yeah, super, super interesting. Going over like all kinds of tips, like UV tips and all that kind of stuff too. Super awesome. I love this. And I think like an hour in or something like that, I had to jump out. So I have not seen a large part of it too. Got the shader set up as well. Yeah, RGB mask shader, let's go. Yeah, that one just recently got released. So go check that out. You'll find a link in the Discord, of course. But we're not here to talk about like some workshop stuff. Hello, Pody. How are you doing? Eli's doing good. That's awesome to hear, Eli. Glad you're doing well. So yeah, let's dive into some of the work for today. We've got how many people? 10 people in total. Oh, Will, what happened to your modular kit out of the Philippines? So, it is basically ready to release. Like, all the approval has been done. Basically, everything has been set up. It's basically already approved by Unreal Engine as well. The only thing that we need to do is just publish it now. The modular kit for that, though, completely got scrapped because we were going over scope for our project. So I'll show everyone what it kind of came out looking as. Let's see. I can find it. Go into some screenshots. Screenshots here. Let's see. Hi Lillian, hi Hudson. Yeah, so this is how it turned out, right? We just full screen this cell. We decided to not gonna go for like a full environment, but we decided to focus on like the individual assets instead, and like the market stalls and all that kind of stuff. So yeah. Hey Filipinos! Yeah, I had a lot of fun. So I was in charge of like a lot of the initial setup, right? Basically figuring out like all the things that we were gonna go do, and like reference hunting, and like I was talking to like some local people as well to really get a flavor of like what would it be, like what would we need to do, like to do like a Filipino pack like really justice, right? Unfortunately we had a lot more plans and we couldn't get everything in, but I think we still did have like a lot of stuff that was really integral. But yeah, I can show you. Like in the beginning it basically looked like this, right? So let's see, what is a good screenshot? We're gonna go into the block out now, right? So let's see. Yeah, so this was kind of like the block out that I ended up with. This is the block out that I made, and then we onboarded like the entire team onto the project, right? This was our initial vision, but we soon realized that that was just like way too big for it, right? No, I didn't take a business trip for the references. That would have been awesome. I would love to do like a business trip there. It kind of made me fall in love like with the whole culture, right? And I really wanted to make or like recreate this environment, right? And I also just want to go there, right? I just want to go and experience the life. At some point we'll get there, I'm sure. That's exactly the Baclaran market. So yeah, this is actually mostly like a road that exists, but it basically it burned down, right? Like this is in the central area of Manila, and the back of this section is where the county jail is, but this whole row of buildings as we were working on it actually burned down. It was like a huge fire that burned all these buildings down. Yeah, that was kind of crazy that was happening. Yeah, just like the scope and the scale of things. I was working on a lot of like the technical setup, right? So we had like I added points to like all of the assets, and it would like spawn like procedural wires between them, which was really cool to work with. But eventually just a lot got cut, right? I was doing like all the modular kits and all that stuff. Yeah, eventually we ended up cutting everything. Spent a lot of time working on the roads as well. Like I did all the textures and like all the setup. I think there's also like a little alleyway. All work that I did, right? All scrapped for the final product. I ended up like just basically scrapping most of the work that I did because we decided to focus on the market assets, right? So then this is after we decided with the whole team, like, hey, we need to scope down, we need to focus on like smaller things, and then we kind of got to this kind of shape, right? Like just focusing on like the individual assets, and then going into the presentation of things. Let's see. The asset collections here, these are the individual ones, and then we have, this is the thumbnail for the pack as well. So yeah, this kind of shows like everything that's included, right? Like the chaos and like the vibrancy that you would expect. Yeah, super cool to work on this though. Even though I didn't do a lot of hands-on stuff that made it into the final pack, right? Nice roads. Thanks, Bulborb. I had a lot of fun with those roads. Like, it was fun making like the little decals and the textures and all that stuff. Yeah. Was this for the Unreal Engine Marketplace? Yes. So, it's already been approved. We just haven't published it yet. I've been too busy with other things. And I kinda want to publish it soon. So that is also like out of the way. I just need to set up like the marketing basically for it. And that's all that needs to be done for it still. The rest is all approved already. Are the assets parameters with exposed... are the assets materials with exposed parameters? Yep. You can change everything. So one thing that I focused on a lot was the technical side of things, right? And so this is just one chair that is just like based on the world position. It has a different color. But what I wanted to do, we wanted to have a specific look, right? Because the Philippines is like dominated by specific colors. So I actually have like a color swatch in there with like 16 colors that are very prevalent in, well, the Philippines or Manila, right? We focus really hard on Manila. So it randomly picks between those rather than just having like a randomized color that has no consistency, right? And then you can also, I don't know if I have a screenshot of this necessarily, but don't think I do. Oh, yeah, I do. It should be in here somewhere. Yeah, so you can like change all the little areas like individually. So what you could do is you could have like a really pristine looking chair that just like a single color. You could also just have like a chair that has like 2 individual regions, and then you can also change like how dirty or how clean it is based on like a slider as well. That will automatically change the colors and like the roughness and all that kind of stuff too. So very modular. And we then took this chair as an example, and we then added all the necessary attributes, so like all the different masks, to all of the assets that we have. So you can go into these cardboard boxes, and you can change the colors. Like each asset has like at least 2 zones that you can color separately, right? Based on whatever it is. You can just like completely color it up, change it up, make it dirty, make it clean, whatever you want. Yeah, really fun to work on. Monoblock chairs. Yeah. We had a lot of monoblock chairs on our reference sheet. It's been almost 20 years since you've been there. Oh, that's awesome that it gives you nostalgia. That means that we did like a decent job on it. I'm happy. Yeah, there's so much. Oh my god. While we're talking about this, right? Before we're gonna go streaming, I'm gonna see if I can share the Miro board for it. We can have a look at it, right? Hey, George! I'm your local TA. Yeah. On this project I was, right? So yeah, just project setup and then mostly technical art I was doing. Let's see. Do I still have like the backup of this? Let's see. What is this one? Oh, shit. Okay. We're gonna go for this one then instead. So let's have a look here. At the end of the day, we decided to only go for the market, right? But there was like a lot of stuff that we had already planned out, like going from street food to like different kinds of meat, different fish, fruits, vegetables, like all that stuff was already in here, right? We even had like the vehicles planned out. And I even had like a system where you would have like randomized vehicles already kind of set up as well. There was a lot of cool stuff happening, but we were just like, look, we need to scope down. A lot of variables are changing, so unfortunately we had to cut a lot of it. Again, this was basically what I was working on the most, right? Just like getting the infrastructure in a really good place. Trying to distill the chaos of Philippine buildings. Oh my god. That was crazy. I think that was the hardest part for me about this project. Even though it has nothing to do with the end result, I was trying to distill like all the intricacies, all the building materials and the different colors like into like a cohesive set. Ugh. Were you gonna do jeepneys? I think so. I think at a certain point we were talking about jeepneys, but I think we kind of cut them out because they weren't relevant to the market side, right? We were still focusing on the market. Yeah. I know, like the settler thing and the chaos that is like building houses in Manila, right? Again, I was looking at a lot of Manila stuff. You would have a lot of people that would build like houses really quickly because the government could break them all down, right? So there was a period where people would build with wood, but they would be easy to tear down, so the government did that, and then the people switched to building with cinder blocks instead. Once people started doing that, it was way harder for the government to come in and actually tear them down at the same rate that they were being built up. From what I can gather, right? So that's why you see like a lot of these buildings that just have like cinder block cores with like a bunch of like isolating materials just slapped on top of it, right? Freaking chaos. Yeah. A lot of fun. Randomized vehicles, are those made using blueprints? Yes. Yep. Yeah, so I don't know if I still have images for those. Don't think so. These are all the final things. Nah, I don't think I have screenshots of those. Even though I remember like sending quite a lot, you know, just to prove. Oh, here we go. Yeah, so this was the setup that I was doing, right? So I took the concept that I was using on the randomized wires, right? I was basically using shit, what are they called again? You can basically add points to any mesh in the mesh itself, right? And then you can use that point as a location for something else to spawn upon, right? So for example, these motorcycles, they would all have like an attachment point on the body. And then wherever that point on the body was, like the pivot point or the local point of the attachment would snap to that, right? And then as you moved it, like it would just like pick like randomized, like out of these, like what are those, like five like orange assets, it would just like randomize between all of them. And then you could set like what the main vehicle was going to be, right? Because you can have a bike, you can have a moped, you can have like a scooter, like a couple of different variations. Same for these like smaller market stalls, right? Like the portable ones. Same system, just with got the name of them. But yeah, basically the same principle, right? So I would just like attach points where it would make sense for other things to attach to, and then just randomize like all the different variables. One with one tire, another has 15 tires, another has 4 drivers. Yes, exactly. Chaos. No, that was really fun. And I'm sure that I'm gonna use like the learnings that I got here. I'm gonna use those in the future. Is it going to be stylistic? Oh no, this is already completed. So what I'm showing off here is what this currently looks like. So this is the end result. So I was basically saying that like a lot of the things that I did or was responsible for, we basically decided to cut down on it because there was just too much to do. We were only a team of like 10 people that were like working full time on the side too, right? So not a lot of time there. But yeah, you'll see that appearing on the Unreal Engine Marketplace soon. I'll keep everyone in the loop when it does. It's crazy how simplistic it is, yet it looks realistic. Yeah, you can do a lot with just the presentation of things, right? Because presentation can make like a huge difference on these things. I think that's what can really elevate like the work here. And taking into account like the work that people did was fantastic, right? But if you don't present it well, then yeah. Have you used the new pattern spline nodes in Substance Designer? Oh yes, Will. I'm talking about sockets. Yep, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Yep, that's something that we or like I used extensively. We have a lot of those big colorful umbrellas at home. Yeah, they're awesome. Have you used the new pattern spline nodes in Substance Designer? No. You can probably notice. Oh no, I hit my taskbar, but I am still using. Let's have a look. From when are you? I'm using Substance Designer from 2020. I am not up to date with Substance Designer because, in my opinion, they haven't really added anything that meaningful for me to update. I also use a perpetual license, right? So I just pay once and that's it. Don't run a subscription or anything like that. No. No, I haven't used them. When I make a simple prop, it looks more stylized, even if I don't want it to. Yeah, in a lot of cases, that has to do with not using enough references, right? I don't know what you're talking about or what your skill level is, but in general, when I notice people run into that, it has to do with not understanding what you're trying to recreate and recreating it in like all the layers that it has, right? Oh, okay. Well, it ain't broke, but you should definitely look into the path in the spline node major update. Yeah, I know that stuff can add like a lot, right? But like for the things that I do and like in general, still wouldn't use it a lot, right? Compared to the core functionality of what Substance Designer already is, like that additional functionality is not worth like an update that costs you like, I don't know, 200 euros or something like that, right? What Substance Painter am I using? Same thing, 2020 I think. Let's see, properties, yep, 2020. That's it. I haven't updated, like I just updated these last time I did, and that was it. I at a certain point, this is such an old man take that I'm gonna say, but at a certain point you get tired of like staying up to date with like all the latest versions when you realize that like the core functionality that you actually use is not really broken. I don't know. Like there is some functionality that I wish, right? Like maybe not even Painter, because I don't do enough. I don't do enough with Painter, honestly. I really don't. I think most of the stuff that I do now is in Substance Designer, not even Painter. So what would I be looking for from Substance Designer? Oh, so there is one thing that I don't have, and it's those named reroute nodes, or like those nodes where you can basically plug it into somewhere and you can just like duplicate it without having spaghetti everywhere, right? That is honestly the one thing that I was like, okay, that looks interesting. But again, not enough for that update, right? Yeah, the dot nodes. I don't have access to that, so everything is just spaghetti with me. But yeah. I have ways to work around that, right? So. Is it word shifting from Blender to Maya? Is it necessary? No. It is totally not necessary. You just have to use the program that you're most comfortable with, or get to use the program that the studio that you're going to be working for is comfortable with. That's basically what it comes down to. Otherwise, I wouldn't switch. Multiple graphs could fix some spaghettiness. Yeah, that's partly what I'm doing. I work a lot with atlases now and Atlas Scatter. And I work in like a very modular way now. Whereas before, I tried to do everything in one graph. Like my graphs are like way smaller than they were. So, how's UVing with Blender? I like it. I really love UVing in Blender. You have to take into account that the stuff that I'm doing doesn't require like a whole bunch of precision, right? Like as environment artists, we can get away with like a lot more imprecision, right? If you are a weapons artist, like then you probably have to look into like using Rism, right? Like an add-on that really helps you UVing. But out of the box UVing for me works fine. Like I like it. It is a little bit of a switch, right? Because you have to work heavily with seams. I've never seen what the issue is all about. It is just like a switch, right? But okay, last question here, and then we're gonna get into some feedback. Question about the Atlas. So it's like a complete material. So it's like a completely material shape that's meant to be scattered or UV mapped on the mesh, right? Example leaves. Oh, yeah. So it would be one substance graph that has like my leaves, right? Like 4 leaves on an atlas. And that would be like the entire thing, right? And you just map it to like your typical output nodes, right? And then in another graph, you would then just drag that graph in, use an Atlas scatter to automatically cut it up for you and scatter it for you. Super, super handy. I was looking for internships criteria, and in some of the studios, they require you to use Maya and Painter. They don't mention Blender, so I don't know what to do because I'm comfortable using Blender. Well, that's what I was saying before, right? Apply saying that you know Blender and that you were willing to switch to Maya, and then as soon as you get the job, you just switch to Maya. Right? That's what I had to do. So in uni, I was using Max. 4 years of Max, right? Only 3ds Max. Got my first job, they were modeling in Maya, so I switched to Maya. Then got my second job at Ubisoft. They were working in Max. Let me think. Yeah, it was Max primarily, right? And then I started picking up Blender again on the side because Blender was picking up, and I was like, oh, I need to check this out. Then I switched to Blender because they didn't really care if it was like an FBX that was coming out of Max or out of Blender, right? So I made the switch to Blender. That's it. The thing, sometimes you have to change if the company is really like, oh, we only use Maya, then you're gonna have to use Maya. There's it's just a tool, right? That's the way that you should look at it. It might be like a different tool, but I don't think it's that hard to pick up another thing. Because it has the same buttons, right? They're just like somewhere else. That's the main thing. You gotta give it some time though. It's not that it's easy, right? But it's not that it's like it shouldn't be costing you the job, right? And then at a certain point, at a certain level, you can potentially say like, hey, look, I don't necessarily need this job. I really want to stick with a certain skill set and tool set, and then I'm just going to focus on that. But in the beginning, you can't really, right? Yeah. I've seen some job postings require deep Blender knowledge when Maya is my main. Yeah. I don't know why they require deep Blender knowledge, right? Because, well, I don't know why they require deep knowledge when, especially if it's catered towards more junior levels, right? Like, what does that mean, deep knowledge as a junior? Because at that point, you have like 1 or 2 years, like 1 or 2 solid years maximum under your belt, right? Working in uni. I'm not even counting the first 2 years, right? Because then you're still just fucking around, right? That doesn't count as deep knowledge to me. Yeah, some of these requirements, I'm gonna be honest, like some of the requirements that you see on job postings, you can just like straight up ignore them. Because let's be honest, like once your portfolio is at a certain level, companies will ignore those like restrictions as well. They're just like, oh, your work looks cool, we want to have you on the team. Oh, you use Blender? That's fine. We can help you train with whatever, you know? What if they need me to own 2 cats? I just have to do it then? Yeah, man. Yeah. Just make sure that they pay for it, right? It becomes like a shared ownership situation. And you can hold it against them if they want to do a breakup, right? That's how it works. Okay. Let's have a look at some work here. We're gonna start with Max. Where's Max? Max is over here. We have a studio here that prefers pirated software because it costs less. That's fair enough until they get caught and then they go bankrupt. Right? Like if a studio like that builds a commercial software and those softwares that it's built upon, they find out, oh my god, you're gonna be in trouble. But hey, they can do whatever they want. The company or the cats pay for it? No, the company needs to pay for the cats, right? And then you have like signed like ownership. So you own 50% of the cats and then the company owns 50% of the cats. And then, yeah, once there's a breakup or the company fires you, they have to pay you alimony, right? For the cats. That's how it works, right? Okay. Let's get into some feedback. Max is having fun blocking this out. For feedback, I'm wondering how I might approach texturing. Oh my god, CS coming in. So the last place I was at, everyone uses their own license or student. What? Oh my god. What? Sometimes this is the thing that worries me, right? Like if I'll talk about myself for a minute, right? If I take more caution with like the licenses that I own and then I get hired by a company that doesn't give a shit, like not a good sign, you know? Like, jeez, that's scary. So Max is working on this nice little environment and Max is wondering how to go about texturing. I'm pretty new to texturing and I would like to know how I could texture the scene efficiently. Oh boy, Max, you're in for a doozy with this one, right? Because there's a lot of stuff to texture. So, number one, let's write that down, right? Because there is a lot. Did I just convert? So, lots of assets. So what that means is if we have a scene that has lots of assets, what we should try to do is, like you said, we should try to texture them efficiently, right? So the best option here is try to find material commonality, right? So common materials. And then turn them into a shared texture. I'm keeping it very vague here, right? But a shared texture can mean trim sheets, it can mean tidables, it can mean atlases as well. Be all kinds of stuff, right? So common materials turn into like shared materials or textures, right? And then the examples here are trim sheets, tidables, and then atlases. I would honestly define them in this sort of range, right? So number one, try to look for opportunities for trim sheets. So what are trim sheets, you're asking, right? So we're gonna do I'm gonna give you like a quick overview, right? So a trim sheet is basically where you have like your materials or like your textures set up in these little trims, right? That's why they call them trim sheets. And then you can map all the objects in your scene onto those trims, right? So imagine that these are all like nice wooden planks, right? So these are all like nice wooden planks. Imagine that they're all individual, right? And then you try to define like the kind of sizes that you need in your scene, and then build a trim sheet around that, so that you can map all the individual pieces. So for example, this guy over here, perfect for a trim sheet. And you just have like one plank here, right? Like one side, and you have like another side here, and then you do the other two sides as well. And you just map them as like straight little sections onto this trim sheet over here. Cool. You can apply that to a ton of these objects, right? So I would split them up by material as well. So first example was wood. I would have like a metal trim sheet as well. Yeah, you're gonna have to find like lots of trim sheets. This is a really dense scene. So try to define them by like the materials, right? So a trim sheet per material. So you have like a wooden trim sheet, you have a metal trim sheet, you have a stone trim sheet, and you go from there, right? Second here is tidables, right? So a little bit more straightforward. So we have like our UV square, and it's basically just like a repeating pattern, right? It repeats in all different directions. I know that I'm kind of going back to basics, right? But really good to understand this stuff. So this is basically a texture that's going to repeat in every direction endlessly. Now, the reason why we don't do trims, right, is because trims, they have like a certain dimension, and they're gonna have like certain cuts and like divisions between those dimensions, right? So you can see that like you still have the edges of one plank here where it transitions into a new plank, right? So we have this like little split that happens here. The benefit of a tidable texture is that it doesn't have any of those splits, so we can map it onto larger surfaces. That's really important, right? So tidables for larger surfaces, trim sheets for like all the more individualistic stuff, right? So what could be a good example of a tidable is definitely the floor, right? A floor is like an easy tidable texture You can map that all out. And that's like a giant surface already covered. You're gonna have to do like a little bit more work and maybe have like another tileable where you can kind of blend it together with vertex painting or something like that, right? But you could also use it for like the walls of the buildings, for example. Like you just have like a stone tileable that you just slap on those guys. The roofs, they can be a tileable as well. Right, so we have trims, tileables, and then atlases. And this is basically where you have a lot of like smaller detail stuff that you can put together on one texture and it becomes an atlas, right? So I would still try to do a lot of these cages with a trim sheet, for example. But let's say, let's see, what else is in here? Yeah. Let's say those boots, right? As a random example. Or, no, I'll give you like a foreground thing, right? So if you have like all these different name tags, right? You want them to be different. Because you're not just going to make like one thing and then just slap it all over because it's going to look the same, right? So that could be like a case where you use an atlas instead. Right, so we have, again, our little square here. And then you just have like all those little name tags. You just stack them up across the entire thing, right? Oh yeah, that's a good point to bring up. Like trim sheets are still tileable, right? But they tile in they tile in all directions technically, but you can't really spread your UVs out in both directions, right? Because again, we have those individual splits. So let's make it really easy. A trim tiles from left to right in this case, right? If you lay your trim out to go vertical instead, then it's going to tile top to bottom. Yeah, an atlas basically has just like a collection of name tags in this case, right? But you can also use it to have like a collection of these breads, a collection of these boots, like all that kind of stuff. That's the way that I would approach it. I know it's a quick overview. There's going to be a lot of stuff to do here. Like a lot of stuff, Max. Keep that in mind as you're approaching this space, because you're going to have to cut corners at some point, right? But this guide is basically going to help you already. So, trim sheets, tileables, and atlases. That's a study you want to look into. I would assume that, like, collectively, like, these two are going to make up, like, I'm going to say, like, 90% of your environment. And then the atlases are probably going to be, like, 10% or even, like, less than that. Because you should, like, really only use them for stuff that you can't put on a tileable or on a trim sheet, and you kind of want them to look, like, individualistic, right? So, name tags, like these shoes. And it's also a good way of optimizing the amount of textures that you're going to be pulling into your scene, too. Because you could, last example that I'll bring up, you could have all these shoes as separate textures, right? But that means that you're going to have, like, let's say 16 individual textures that are going to be pulled in every time. Whereas you can just, like, put them into one texture and have, like, a more optimized, what to get into. It's going to be more optimized for, like, the game environment, right? Because that's really important for us. That's what I would say. I'm going to keep it really generic with this. There's going to be a lot of work for you, Max. So, best of luck. Hard to answer. Are the objects modular? I think at this scale, you kind of have to not make modular, right? Like, you can make things non-modular and still keep, like, lots of trim sheets. But to me, when I hear the word modular, I'm thinking just in general, like modularity, like the reuse of things, right? Not necessarily the assets, but also like the textures and the trim sheets and all that kind of stuff. Cool. Thanks, Max. Let's see. Who's next? We got Khan here. Khan, where are you at? Wanted to see if I can create an ambience I was looking for. It is still in Blender, and I haven't taken it into Unreal Engine yet. Okay. And also suggestions on what elements I should add in the foreground. In the background as well. I think you got a perfect example here. What's insane? Sorry, wrong term. Modular pieces are more like objects that can be combined into multiple ways. Yeah, I know. Like, it's just, I find it really weird that we have really built this idea in general, right? That something that's modular, it's broken down into like individual pieces and that can only apply to assets, right? I find that like really confusing for me sometimes. But yeah, that could be a way to do it. With that kind of a scene, right? It was pretty organic, like the shapes were pretty much all over the place. I probably wouldn't recommend it, and just focus more on like how to make yourself more flexible in terms of the shapes rather than keeping yourself really strict to a modular approach, right? Because the issue with modularity, especially if you're doing it the first time doing it, is that it can feel like very straight and very lifeless. And I'd rather stay away from that. As a recommendation, right? They still have their uses though. Sapone, hello. Do you have any advice for entry 3D environment artists who are seeking to work in a company? That's a broad question. If I were to give you like any advice, tell a story, sell it visually, and make it easy to access. If I were to nail it down to like 3 things, maybe a 4th one is, well, I would stick to those 3 ones. Those 3 I think are like a really good foundation. And then you could potentially add a 4th one is showcase your ability, right? So breaking things down, showcasing that you can do certain shaders, certain tricks, certain workflows, have that all embedded in your portfolio, right? So Khan is looking for some additional foreground and background elements. I was gonna say, like, the stuff that you have here in your... Oh god, there's some interesting stuff happening. We'll get to that in a little bit. So what I will say is that the concept itself is pretty nicely compact, right? You could have it as like a little diorama that's like next to like the rocky shores, right? You could kind of build it into like a diorama. So the concept works well for scale. For scale and scope. I would honestly start there. You could start adding like a bunch of stuff in the background, but that honestly depends on what you want to make from it, right? Like, you have to check out references. So what kind of region are you basing this on? Right? What does a shoreline look like? What is an interesting shoreline compared to one that is not that interesting? Because I'm immediately like imagining like mountains in the back, right? Just having like a giant mountain, like a slope, and you see like more of the village and all that kind of stuff. The issue with that is that you're going to increase your workload by a lot too. right? So that's why I'm focusing on this little concept over here, because it is nicely compact in its scope. Yeah, so shorelines in northern countries, right? That's what I would really look for references, and that's going to give you a lot when it comes to the foreground and the background as well. That's where I would start. Because that's where I get my ideas from too, right? Like, what does this stuff look like in real life? What does it look like in shows, right? Like Vikings. What does a shoreline in Vikings look like? What does a shoreline in Assassin's Creed Valhalla look like? You can lean into those things and get like a lot of good references. And also, how should I approach the lighting as well? Any critique is welcome. The lighting kind of is going into like an okay direction where you have like a really moody setup currently, right? It feels like very stormy weather, and you're doing something here with the fire as well. So we're kind of getting like a contrast, right? This is something I'll refer you to like some of our workshops as well, where it goes more into like color composition and all that stuff. Usually when you want to present something, you have to think about contrast. So I'm gonna keep it again very generic. Think about contrast. You can think about color contrast, right? So usually what works well, very stereotypical, but it works, is blue and orange, right? You can imagine yourself as in like in a moody shoreline, like dark bluish because we're going into night, and then have like a boat that's on fire. That's gonna have like a very striking contrast between those two color elements. Gonna look really cool. Contrast can also be where we put our focus, right? Like how lit is an area compared to another area. That's also a good way of contrasting things. So let's call that intensity, right? So light versus dark. And with this, we're specifically going to control where people are going to be looking, right? Because if we have a bright light source on the left, that means that we're going to attract people to look here rather than over here, right? So that's something you have to take into account where you construct the bones of your environment. So what I would do is, if you want to have more people looking at the building, you have to make sure that that's where the contrast is coming from, right? So having this door open, having like orange light coming out of it, removing these boxes, and then having like a blue sky around it is going to make sure that we're focusing here rather than, right? Keep that in mind. Think about it in those rough, very fundamental terms, rather than seeing it through the eye of an environment artist. I know that I'm sounding like really wishy-washy here, right? But like the fundamentals are really important when it comes to this stuff. You can also kind of see what we mean with the intensity of the light when it comes to the concept, right? Like the light and the values that we're seeing in the building are like brighter compared to the values that are around the object itself. It's going to pull us in and make us watch the building. I'm keeping it very generic. Keep that in mind. Create an ambience I was looking for. I'm still in Blender and I haven't taken it into Unreal yet. Okay, so third thing, before we go any further, take it in I want you to take it into the place where you're going to present it. That's really important, because right now we're kind of wasting time, right? What is kind of happening now is that you're playing around in Blender, you're getting a grip of things, but we will have to redo all that work once we take it into Unreal Engine, right? So before you go any further, take it into Unreal, and then try to figure out like the mood and all that kind of stuff. Because otherwise we have to do that work like twice, and we don't want to do that. So make a little stop sign. Stop 2 times working with an exclamation point. Automotive video games these days is one of the best sources of references, in my opinion. Yes, I agree, but you have to be careful how you use them, right? I have a ton of references like that I'm just taking around when I'm walking in games, right? But you have to make sure that you use them for the right reasons. So for example, lighting references are great, right? Because there is not really like a distillation that happens from like real life lighting compared to in-game lighting, right? But let's say, for example, if you were trying to imitate, or if you're trying to make a wooden roof, right? And you see an awesome wooden roof in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which I did and I have taken pictures from. You have to realize that that wooden roof is already a distillation of a real life wooden roof that existed sometimes, right? And I always find it way better to go to the actual source than to take from someone's interpretation of that potential source. If that makes sense, right? So I want to get as close to the source as possible. Obviously, for some stuff, it's really tricky. It's not like you're finding like a wooden roof from medieval times just like lying around on your doorstep either, right? But there are interesting things where you can still find them, right? Like museums, there are recreations that are being built with like old school techniques, all that kind of stuff, right? But in general, I totally agree though, Archie. Like I've taken like a ton of images. Is this Scandinavian inspired? No, it's inspired by this concept, which is probably Scandinavian inspired. This is apparently a concept from Decagon Studios, according to Khan. Khan, that doesn't look like Decagon to me. That looks like Leartis. But I'll forgive you. I want it to be more aesthetic, like we see in Game of Thrones or Vikings. Yeah. That's great, right? If you have that image in your mind, like look at the shows and look what elements they have in their show that you're missing out on. And then try to find like where they come from, right? Obviously, you don't have to look up like the whole history about like a wooden box, because a wooden box is always just gonna be like a wooden box, right? There's cool wooden looking boxes, but if you're just looking for filler for your environment, make a wooden box. Cool. Pretty high level, Con. But this is really gonna help, I think. So think about like the fundamental parts, like color contrast, like color theory, like think about those things first. Oh, last thing that I wanted to bring up, scale. Really important. I'm gonna point it out here, right? This guy. Cool. Ooh, that's cool. Right? So take scale into account. Really important. Is that a pirate ship, perhaps? No. No, it's not. Because those are different, right? Like, this is like a Viking warship. Even has, like, the person scale reference in front of it. I think, honestly, is this like a rip from a game or something? Is it like... I don't know. Let me make assumptions. No, but like a pirate ship would look completely different, right? Yeah, no. Scale is important. Also, hi, Kyle. Unreal Engine model. Could be. Still, scale, very important. Oh, there you are. From Sketchfab, I just wanted to place it and see how it looks, hence the scale is off. Okay. See how it looks, hence the scale is off? Oh, okay, so you scale down the boat and all that stuff. Okay, cool. Yeah. I would try to keep everything at like just the scale that it is, right? And then try to make it work with like placement or like the placement of the camera instead. Because we're not really... I get what you're trying to do, right? But it's not really anything that we can then translate into our environment at the end, right? Because then you would need to scale up the boat and that's going to change like how we're going to place it and all that kind of stuff too. Cool. Thank you, Khan. Thank you for showing this. I will post these overpaints like in your little thread after we get done for today as well. Maybe it's for Viking children training. Yeah. Or like Viking rats, right? Like trained up rats. Why not? Appreciate it. We'll take all the feedback. Yeah, I would say think about it, right? And think how you can like apply yourself to it. Looking forward to the next update. Then we're gonna go to Eli. Okay, no questions, so I'm just gonna have a look at this. I think. Let's make sure. Did I miss any questions? Added RVT to the rocks and foliage. That's awesome. Need to add more scattered meshes on the floor. Grass is being placed in the scene via the landscape material using the landscape grass type. Yeah, I love that. That's cool. Sia is literally obsessed with this scene, apparently. It's awesome. So many people today. Yeah, it's lovely. So many people to hang out. I think what's also nice is that people want to ask questions in the meantime, right? So I'm gonna try to do my best to have like a better mix of just like looking at stuff and then having a question as well. Because there's some good questions in the chat too. Yeah, this is looking good though. It's going nice. I like the little pebbles that you have. Yeah. This can definitely be improved, right? Like the rest of the foliage has like such a beautiful like shape to it. It's such a beautiful silhouette. And then you have these trees. I don't know, no context, but they just have like these flat spaces on them, right? It just looks like a little bit off. So that can definitely be improved. If there was like one thing that I wanted to bring up. So fronts from the trees can be improved. Definitely. That's a good question. Bodhi is asking why there's like a difference in the tree stem. That is a good question. Because it happens on the big ones as well, right? Oh. I have the feeling that that might be... Let's see. Is that RVT just screwing up? Because RVT is not great at doing like vertical stuff, right? Because it's basically projecting like all the information down and it's gonna stretch all the information. Unless you do some like mix of triplanar and like RVT. But yeah, that has its own like performance disadvantages, right? Yeah, that would be something to look into. Hey Rafa! Good to see you here. How are you doing? So, differences on the tree trunks, right? Looks a little bit weird. The rest of it looks really nice. Looks really nice. We're getting some interesting colors, right? I feel like now it's time to really experiment with how much the different colors are like dominating the scene, right? Because we have majority orange and brown, and then we have splotches of like blue and green, right? Play around with those different different percentages, right? And see if you can find like something interesting there. So play around with color variations or color percentages. That's the way that I'll say it, right? Because the variations are nice. It's just how dominant a color is compared to another. It could be experimented with here. Yeah. That's all I'll say. No specific questions for this one, so it's been great to see an update, Eli. Thanks so much for sharing it. And then we're gonna go into the next one, which is from Moriox. Moriox is working on a Star Wars scene, which is already looking awesome. Market Alley, inspired by Star Wars, obviously, on a deserted planet. Or desert-ic planet. Oh my god, my brain just broke while reading that. Love to get some feedback, especially on the floor and the overall ambience of the scene. I'm still open to any feedback as well. At the moment, I'm working on adding sheets between both sides of the alley. You can see my references and adding more storytelling to the front of the market stand. Cool. Yeah, I think that's going to be important, right? You have the core of the scene is already like really well presented. And I like it. I think you're definitely right that I kind of want to see what is happening in the main part here, right? Like what's the story here? Right? Or like, what are you trying to showcase us? That would be like the first point, like you brought up yourself. So the story for the market stall is definitely going to be important. Also, try to think about how you can introduce, like, again, some sort of color contrast, right? What I really like is that we have some interesting references here. They don't go as bold on the color contrast spectrum, right? But you can still see that there's like a lot of gray, right? So like this shop is surrounded by gray material. Or let's say more muted earthy tones, right? And then you have like the center of it, which is like very bright and inviting, right? Obviously, this is a theme park, so they have done that with a purpose, right? If we zoom in a little bit, that is to draw you in, right? Very specifically to get you to buy stuff, right? Because that's where they make their money. We just have to do something like that as well, to draw people in and give them an indication of what the story might be. Right? And in your case, we're going to have to work with slightly different colors because we already have the scene that is built out of like a very dominant orange spaces, right? So in our case, we kind of have to flip it on its head a little bit and maybe showcase a space where it's gonna say it anyway, we can talk about details later, where maybe it's early morning, right? And like the early morning sun is like beaming into the market, but the market is still like getting up and running, right? So we have like more muted tones coming from the inside because people are still setting up the market itself, and there's not as much light trying to draw people in, right? So kind of working with more bluish kind of tones inside, and then having the exterior be more orange, right? Something like that. So I'm gonna write that up as a suggestion. There are other ways where you can do this, right? There's other things that we can do. But this is like the most common thing, right? Again, I would look into color theory, see if you can find like some really interesting things that you can do there. Gonna help you a lot. What you can also do is you can work with a lot more density, right? So the benefit that you currently have is that the street outside is not cluttered at all, right? Apart from this little area here, right? But if you imagine that all that clutter and all that detail, right? Because that's the way that I look at things. If that detail was inside here, detail is something that attracts us as well. If there's lots of stuff going on, a lot of visual density, like we get attracted to that as like humans as well. So again, we can kind of use that to our advantage, right? And maybe we put like a lot of stuff into this one market stall, and then maybe simplify some of the other areas so that we focus on what we want people to focus on. Yeah. So contrast in details, right? Yeah, so I know that we kind of veered off a little bit, right? But like the general ambiance and then also the floor. But I think the general ambiance is really good already, right? So let me just focus on the floor a little bit. What I want to see in the floor is I want to see people's past interactions with that floor. So, means footsteps, tracks, etc., right? I don't know what is available in like the Star Wars repertoire in this specific area that might be like a really interesting like little thing that you can incorporate in that. But just having like foot trails, you know, that go from the shop and they go from like one shop to the next one, and maybe they kind of crisscross into the distance, right? Gong droids, that could be cool. The right side is completely empty. I honestly don't mind that. Like the right side being like not as filled as the left side. I honestly don't mind it. Because the thing is like, if you could fill it up, right? Like you could fill it up and not be too distracting as long as you keep like the core of the scene rather empty. But it's also like we're not really looking there, right? So I don't think it's like a thing to necessarily fix. One thing could be interesting is look at repetition, right? That's the thing that's probably like an easy fix, but you got these two like market stalls that a repeat, small thing, but easy to fix. Dewback footprints. I've got no idea what that is, but that sounds awesome. So let me add that. Is that dewback? That's the thing, right? Like these things, like if you're doing a portfolio piece on it, like you're gonna have to dive into like, okay, what's this planet? What are the creatures living there? Like, what are the people living there? Like, do they have drawers? Like, all that kind of stuff. You can then incorporate that into your scene in some way or another, right? So yeah, have some tracks there. Have some droid tracks. Have some dewback tracks. It's gonna look awesome. And then maybe if you really want to make, this might also help you with focusing more on the shop itself. Have some sort of a stone pattern. Honestly, I think that could be like really awesome. Just to have like the majority of, let's imagine that there's like some sort of stone patterning going on here, right? And it kind of just disappears into like the sand at a certain point. But that would be like a great way of showcasing like a difference between the outside where it's like mostly sand and in the inside where you have like stone tiles, like sandstone colored tiles, like partially buried into the sand, right? Still to give it a difference between like, hey, this is my shop and this is the exterior of my shop. So yeah, and maybe a little bits of garbage, right? Again, contextual garbage. Gonna sound silly, but again, plucking from the region, that space, who walks there, all that kind of stuff, you could add like little interesting Easter eggs by just having garbage there, right? Like what do people leave behind? Okay, Megval. Ah, you always have to take it that way, huh? Come on. It always has to be corpses or pyres or fires burning. Come on, man. Have some nice garbage. It would fill up the entire space. That's true. Yeah. It wouldn't serve our composition, right? Like a Jabba the Hutt corpse. Okay, Moyonks, some ideas to play around with. Thank you so much for posting your work. If you want to get feedback, again... Oh, wait, hold up. I was a little bit hesitant about the stone pattern on the ground, but you are not the first person talking about this, so I will definitely give it a try. So, here's the thing, Lillian. Wait, hold up. Moyox, right? I'll call you Lillian from now on. You can decide, right? Because I noticed that there was a reason why you didn't want to add it. So I was kind of giving you like a halfway solution, right? I was like, cool. In these pictures, I'm seeing lovely sandstone. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. But it could still be like a really nice distinction between the actual market stalls and then the rest of it, right? Could be really cool. And the good thing about it is you don't have to like scatter the entire thing and then have to think about like blending it multiple times and making it look unique, all that kind of stuff, right? You just have it in one specific spot because that's where you want people to look. And then the rest of it can still remain the same with just like footprints or stuff, right? You can make those with decals. That's going to be relatively easy. Yeah, definitely try it. No, thank you so much for posting your work. Welcome to the community as well. Thank you so much for joining us. If you want to get feedback again next week, make sure to re-add your tag for next week, right? Because I do remove them in between weeks. So, giving that a shout out because some people, I haven't really done enough reminders there. Okay, thanks so much for sharing it. No worries, Lillian. Happy to help. Okay, next up, we got Archie. We are looking at. Awesome. Bulborb is saying, come on, man. Every time, man. Every time Megval guy comes in, just comes up with these crazy ideas. Keep him coming though. Okay. Yeah, who invited that guy anyway? Archie, let's have a look here. I've tried to tackle the lightning notes from the last review, as well as added some minor points here and there. Cool. I'm having a hard time figuring out when to call this project done and when to move on to the rendering, a short animation, and post-editing. Yeah. Just figuring out when to post something is a very good question. Because I feel like you have to define that point for yourself, right? Because if we don't define that point somewhere, we're probably going to keep working on it forever. Right? Because there's always something that we can do better. There's always something that we can improve. And we end on this like eternal artistic like threadbill. And that either leads to like one of two things, right? It's like you never post something because you're still working on it, or you have a bunch of abandoned projects because you kept working on it for way too long before shutting it down and just like posting it, right? So I would say one thing that I try to keep in mind a lot is if I fulfilled the key learnings that I wanted to have from this project. I have no clue what these were for you. Let's have a quick look. Lighting notes. I'll give an example, right? So let's say, for example, you wanted to complete your first environment. I have no clue if this is true, right? But just as like a general environment, a general look. Let's assume that your goal was to finish your first environment and to kind of get to know how to work with tilables, right? You completed that. And then after that, what you're doing is just you're trying to finish it to get it on your portfolio, right? Once you've figured out like your core learnings and you've fulfilled on them, like I would honestly just get it out, present it, and then just push it out and then go to the next thing. Because what you're doing once you fulfill your core learning goals is you're just like repeating things that are probably already like somewhat relevant to what you've done before, right? So that, in my opinion, means that you're not learning as much as you could be when you're picking up like a new project and doing something completely different on a skill that you want to learn now. And that's way more valuable to do than to just keep improving on a thing that you already are familiar with, right? There's always improvements, but yeah, there's probably going to be bigger learnings that you can focus on next. Very weird, very general kind of term, right? But that's the way that I would look at it. So for example, you bring up the idea of like, oh, I can have like roots coming up and like wrap around a portal. I would not do that in this environment. I would honestly do that in the next project and make it all about that, right? And have your next project be, I'm gonna focus on speed tree now. And just approach it that way. That would be my 2 cents. That's the way that I've always kind of preferred it. That you can build projects around your skills, and then that kind of gives you like a natural like cutoff point where you can be like, okay, I learned enough. I'm just gonna present it and then I'm gonna push it off. In terms of feedback, I was wondering how this environment looks overall. I'd rather not do overall because then we can kind of keep going, right? I think still some of the feedback that I said last week still stands, right? I can remember that we were kind of talking about like a color contrast right? Like we've been doing with other people as well. The scene still feels like really dominant when it comes to orange. That's something that I would try to remediate by like bringing up the blues way more. But that's something that we talked about last week. So that still stands in my opinion. And if anything stands out, that may need polishing or changes. Last detail I was thinking of adding to the portal. Okay, this were the vines growing out of the water, right? Maybe adding more displacement to the portals to make it more alive. You could. You definitely could. But this is where we get into the weird territory of like, you're not really doing environment artwork anymore, right? Because in general, I would say that the portal feels like relatively flat. But this is also coming from, I know that that is not your speciality, right? But you still need it to make it look like a portal. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from with like the light, right? Like try to make it like more impressive by just adding like a brighter blue light that it shines rather than just being like a very neutral kind of thing right now. Let's see, anything that can use like a little bit of polish. Like some quick wins, that's probably what I'm going to focus on then. Let's see. Okay, I'm just going to point out some things then. Let's have a look. So, I'm not convinced by the texture on these pillars. Right, it still feels like heavily like a tileable, and what I kind of want to see is where the tileable kind of like impacts the silhouette a little bit, so that this really feels like it's like a made pillar, right? You can kind of do that by just cutting out like these shapes and like pushing them out just a little bit. These pillars also look like a little bit unnatural to me. Oh yeah, I don't have the concept here anymore. Yeah, so in the concept they had like a different look. Let's see. Right, it looks to me, and keep in mind this is still a concept, right? So there are points where we should definitely deviate from a concept. It kind of feels to me here though that the pillars are like made of bricks, and then there's like some rough concrete, and then like the top of it gets bricks again. So there's like a nice material separation happening there, where that is currently not really happening in this case, and it kind of just feels like very unnatural, right? One way to solve that is, what would be a quick way of solving that, right? Because that's what we're focusing on now. Okay, I've got a solution here. So, you know where you got moss? Is that even moss? I think so, right? You got moss between the stones, right? I think that's a cool little detail, but it also doesn't help with like how tileable the bricks feel, right? So what I propose is we have moss that goes up until this part of the pillar. And then we also partially like cover it up with foliage, right? So we remove the foliage here, place it all down, because what is going to happen is that there's going to be a lot of moisture down at the bottom, right? Because that's where the water is. So what is happening, even in these guys, right? You have like water. So that water is kind of growing up. It's kind of making it so that the foliage can like really bloom around like the bottom parts, right? Because it's getting a lot of sustenance. And then keep the tops of those pillars like just clean, or like cleaner, right? You could still have like the occasional like breakup, like this stuff here, right? Where it doesn't look like moss, but it adds like a little bit of variation. And then reduce like how noisy they are for the rest of it. What we're doing is we're trying to reduce like the noise overall, and we're pushing it to the points where it kind of makes sense for the noise to be. So we would have like lots of moss coming up here. It would have like foliage growing up until these parts. And you can kind of vary that up based on which pillar we're looking at, right? So this pillar might have like lots of foliage growing here. Then this pillar can be just like a little bit tiny, right? And we add like a lot of variation by using the same elements that you have already, but trying to approach them in like a more logical way, right? Where it's not necessarily about like adding foliage wherever it just feels good, but sometimes it's really nice to make it logical. Then we do that pass on like all these pillars. And I know that I say logical, right? But like whenever I say logical, it basically comes down to reference and understanding how foliage grows, right? Like how does moss spread, and just looking at like a bunch of references, right? And then once you're going to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to put like a lot of density and a lot of frequency in the places where it kind of makes sense, and the rest of it is going to remain like nice and soft. And that's going to help with the readability of the picture. So what is going to happen is, because we're putting all of our detail like down here, right? We're shifting the amount of details, is that the focus is going to remain around the center part of the image, because that's where all the details are, right? It's also going to help with the tiling issue, right? Like how repeating like a tiling texture is. Gonna help with a lot of things here. So I think that could be an easy win to make this environment way better without having to invest into like new materials, new textures, all that kind of stuff, right? Like that was the way that I was going into the beginning. But at this point, I would rather focus on minimal input, maximum gain kind of changes. And I think that's definitely one of them. So, logical place of moss and foliage. That would definitely be my main thing. The second thing that we discussed was also like just color contrast, right? I'm just gonna write it as that. But I'm not going to dive into it as basically previous session, right? What I discussed before. I think that might also be like a really big win already. The displacement thing from Mechval could be really interesting, where it basically is like a little bit more volume to the portal. And then also thinking about like adding more volume to the tileable here by adding POM to it. So POM is parallax occlusion mapping, where it's basically gonna fake depth by using a height map for the texture, right? So it's basically gonna offset how something looks. So it's really good at faking depth on textures that currently don't have it, right? Especially at these angles where we're going like a little bit lower, like POM can have like a really interesting effect. And it can have like a huge impact as well. That can have like a big win too. Yeah, that's where I would keep it for now, I think. And then, yeah, the last thing was the speed tree exercise, right? Oh, would I recommend POM over tessellation? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I find POM just like way easier to use. Right? And especially for people that don't have beefy machines. Well, I haven't used tessellation with Nanite yet, but I don't know how performance impacting that is. But from the stuff that I've heard, it's probably still better to go with POM. Just for performance reasons. It's really simple to set up as well. Super simple. But yeah, the speed 3 thing, I would definitely take that into a new project. And take those learnings from that speed 3 project and then make like the next thing, right? And you're basically, with every project, you're like leveling up your skill set. Cool, Archie. Congratulations, by the way. You mentioned that in the beginning. That you're a new dad, so congrats on that as well. Yeah, and thanks for sharing your work. How do you avoid wonkiness when looking at POM from really close to the side? You put something in its place. It sounds really simple, right? But that's the way that it generally works. Like you make it so that you can't see POM from like really glancing angles. So usually if you, let's say, I do this a lot, right? So let's say top down, this is your wall section, and you as a person are standing here and you're looking at it that way. What you just have to do is you put like a little pillar here. So you can't do that. It's basically about smart usage and some pre-planning. Can help you a lot. Because what we are trying to do in game art specifically is we are trying to fake a lot of things, right? Whiskey? No, this is iced tea. But yeah, we are trying to fake a lot of things, right? We get to work with like a lot of smoke and mirrors in games. So, for example, in this situation that I gave you, right? Like that wall, this is actually an example that I use in my medieval scene, right? Let me actually see if I can bring it up as like an image. Let's see. So many screenshots here. No. See if I can find the one. This is not even everything yet, because I got previous versions too. Yeah, this is not everything. So, this screenshot, right? So, you have the pillars that are made with like actual geometry, and then the walls in between are fake with POM, right? But because they work together, they give you the impression that the rest of the wall is also real geometry. Right? So that's what we are trying to do. We're constantly trying to sell something as something that it might not even be. You got some more examples here as well. Right? Like this pillar, you can see the silhouette because it has like actual geometry, and then the rest of it is POM. Here's some old screenshots, by the way. But POM can look really, really good. There is one screenshot. I'm not gonna find it though. In my entire list of screenshots. Oh. This one, I think. That entire wall is just POM, right? It looks really good. Looks really convincing. I mean, it's not glancing angles that we were talking about, right? But POM can look really convincing. And again, you can see like all the way on the right. You can see that you have the pillar with the actual geometry. Right. Back to this. Oh, we might as well dive into it. Because I had it open just now. Because this is bringing me back. Sorry, let me... Pyroxylus. This little concept here is bringing me back because that's where I started like freaking 3 years ago almost. No, more than 3 years ago. With my medieval project as I started working on it. Look at it. This is like the first screenshot of the project. But yeah, we're gonna dive into that in just a bit, right? Because I basically tried to do the same thing as you were doing. And then once I started breaking it down into modular pieces, I was like, oh, I'm gonna build a city now. So, I wouldn't recommend doing the same, right? You probably have a way different timeline than I do, but yeah, we started out similar. So, let's see. A strategic pillars? Yeah. What's the difference between POM and deferred decals? They're basically completely different approaches, right? Like a deferred decal can have POM to simulate depth, right? So this is like a very common technique where you have like a deferred decal that is like projected onto like a road or something like that, that has POM to simulate the depth of it. Whereas POM is just like the underlying technique to fake depth on an object without actually using geometry, right? Because that's the whole power about POM. It doesn't actually use geometry, where before tessellation was like a really unoptimized way or like a really performance heavy way of creating that detail, but it would require geometry, right? Where POM actually does it, it kind of fakes it on your screen and it changes the pixels. So it's like a normal map then. Yes. It's not a specific texture, right? Because it is driven by your height map. It just interprets the height map in a certain way to offset like pixels on your screen. What it comes down to fake the effect of parallax fusion mapping. I'm starting with a house, but it's true that it would be really nice to add some complexity to the scene. No, don't. You don't have to. But so your questions here, right? Let me dive into them. So your objectives are as followed: create a modular environment ready for play in Unreal Engine 5. Okay. Work with trim sheets, vertex paint, and other real-time texture optimization techniques. Cool. And see how a complete scene in Unreal Engine, which I've never done before as I'm new to the engine. Well, how to complete like a scene. Okay. There's a lot to take in there, right? Never done a complete scene in Unreal Engine 5. And then setting yourself up to make like a fully modular environment ready to play in Unreal Engine 5. There's a lot there already, right? So I would just keep it small, right? I'm just gonna make some notes here. I know this is old news, but keep it small. Like, this is perfectly fine, right? I would honestly be really happy to see something like this, like really nicely detailed, and then just have nothing around it, right? Like a favorite example of mine, if I can actually find it. It's gonna pop up on ArtStation like immediately though. So we type in modular, this guy. This is a beautiful example of something that you can do, or like a good showcase of something that is modular, right? And can just stand on its own 2 feet. Like, you don't need to do anything else. It's just about the building, and that's it. That is honestly the way that I would approach your environment as well. So you can kind of see, like, they have like a modular breakdown as well, I think. You know, so like all the modules here too. difficulty is in the concept that you've chosen, right? Because you can break this down into like a modular set as you're doing, right? But what you're gonna have to do is you're gonna have to create like a lot of really specific pieces that you're gonna require, right? Because let's say you have this slanted piece, right? Then you also need to make like a slanted section here. But would that be like a separate piece or not, right? Because this could be like a, what is that? That could be like a 4x4 again, right? But you need those slanted pieces, and then to accommodate for those slanted pieces, you need like this awkward piece, and it's just like, ugh, what do I do with it? So you can do it, but sometimes what is better is recognizing what is unique about this building and try to treat it that way, right? So the way that I would approach it is generally you have like your pieces, right? You have like your 4x4, 4x4 here, 2x4, all that kind of stuff. That's good. But when it comes to like something more unique like this, I would potentially treat it like a more unique piece. Same thing here, right? You have like the front of the house. They realized that is like a unique piece of the building, so they kind of treated it that way and made it just in like a single module, right? Like everything is kind of baked into that module. And you can see it creates like a beautiful effect, right? Because that breaks up like how modular something feels. I would honestly treat your approach kind of as the same way. So I would do this little section as just like a section by itself. Because, yeah, you haven't even started about like on the fun part yet, and that's the roof, right? If you want to break that down into a modular piece for a roof like this, it's gonna be tricky. So what I would do, again, this roof is gonna be unique, right? I would also do that unique. Because the issue with this is that a lot of these dimensions are going to be very specific to a building like this, right? Because let's assume, right, you are cutting it like in half, right? So this would be your modular piece, right? Let's assume that, and we're diving into like modular hell territory here, right? It's like, okay, cool, but what happens if I have a building that is like twice as wide? Right? It's like, oh shit, now I have to deal with like this giant gap in between, and I can't just use like the same roof on top of this because the slope is not gonna match. Right? So at a certain point, we're gonna get to a point where a lot of this is gonna be like very specific to the building, and then the core components can potentially be unique. But then we have to ask ourselves the question of like, okay, is it still really unique or not? Or like, is it still really modular or not, right? And that's something for you to decide. I don't know how far you plan to take this or what your plans are into the future, right? But I would definitely take like the roof and like this unique piece, and then yeah, this one is also going to be like really tricky, so that would be like a unique one as well, like the roof especially. That would be a unique one. Oh, yeah. I hope that makes sense. I'm not trying to shatter your dreams for modularity here, right? It's just really hard to do like a unique building like this in like a modular way, where it kind of makes sense to do it in a modular way, right? Because even the building that we were talking about here, right? It is still like a very structurally like a very modular like building, right? You can see the repetition in it. Or you can like distill it to its like core essence, like relatively quickly, right? Where with something like this, probably less relevant to do so. When I did a modular roof, I made a 1 meter section that I scaled vertically to fill the gap between the end pieces. Is that a bad practice? Made a 1 meter section that I scaled vertically. So you're basically... Wait, so you're talking about like a beam that you then scale like that? Horizontally, right? Yeah. Yeah, because you're gonna stretch the whole texture, right? Unless you do triplanar mapping, but then you're adding like a bunch of performance overhead, right? Because now you're projecting like 3 textures based on the axis, right? I realized that modularity was a complex concept. No, I don't think so. I think the stuff that I'm seeing broken down here shows that you really have this drive to do something modular, right? I think what you need to do is potentially do it in the next one, right? Where you pick a concept that can actually work with something in a modular way, if that makes sense. Because the roof especially, right? Like you can break this up into like individual pieces, right? If you wanted to, that would be totally fine, right? That's an easy thing. It's just the roof that is always the tricky thing about the buildings. Because ideally, what you want to showcase if you do a modular building is, let's say, hey, I built this building in a modular way. And people are ultimately going to distill that down into like, okay, but what if I have this piece, right? The piece that we discussed before. Like I cannot make like a different building with that, right? Or like a different roof because it's limited by the curve and the arch that we're currently dealing with, right? I mean, you can, right? Like you can, now thinking about it, like you can add like a middle piece and all that kind of stuff to it. And you can have like a 1 meter piece and a 2 meter piece and a 4 meter piece and all that kind of stuff. But then you are never going to have like a rooftop that's going to merge into like one point, right? So yeah, if we go back to basics, I think all the core components can be built out of modular, right? Let's split it up. If you want to stick to modularity, right? I would do it like this. Modular, and then do the top unique. Because I know that you can do the bottom, it's just the top. It's going to be like a little bit trickier, right? That's the way that I would approach it. Okay, let's move on to the next thing that you were asking. So, working with trim sheets, that's good. Right now, I'm having a bit trouble figuring out how to start with the modular side. I don't know if it's better to make the walls directly with the beams. Oh yeah, this was another question. Make the walls directly with the beams, right? So, like this example here. Or to make neutral and more square walls. Plus those with the windows to add to the beams on top later. Let's see. I have the impression that in most of the references I find, like the God of War reference here, so that's this one. Walls are in like a 1:1 or a 2:1 ratio, which works well for square and modern buildings. In my case, I feel like I'm working on a case-by-case basis. I don't really have any modularity. Well, yeah, that's another thing, right? Like you have like a more organic shape building. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to split it into more pieces that give you more flexibility. So for example, the 1.5 meter piece, right, that you already have, that's probably something that you have to do because you have this like little thing sticking out here, right? So I would generally keep it to... Because this is what a modular kit always comes down to, right? You're going for the biggest dimension possible. Because the smaller you go, the more you lose the part that is really attractive about like a modular kit, that you can build something really quick, right? Because you have the building pieces and you can just slap stuff together, right? So you have to decide where like the drop off is for where the drop off is for like how big something needs to be, where it doesn't sacrifice the look of the building, right? That's what you're trying to find out here. Could be 1.5. I think that looks good currently, but you'll have to play around with that, right? That would be like number 3 as well. You're gonna have to play around with it and test a lot. Let's see. And then you were asking the question, or if it's better to make the walls directly with the beams, right? So where we have like the beams embedded into the walls, or have them as like separate things outside of it. And I think what I would do, you can have a combination. Right, because you could have like these guys over here and then still add like a beam to make it feel more organic, right? Because what modularity also comes down to is the base kit is usually very modular looking, but it's how we add stuff on top of it that's going to reduce how modular it feels, right? So I would honestly do the approach of beams embedded, and then additional set dressing beams for like details. That's the way that I would approach it, because you're gonna need those anyway. And what is fantastic about a modular kit is that you can have all those individual elements laid out in Blender or whatever program you use, right? And then you can kind of use it as like a Lego box if you need like a new modular component, right? Because you're just slapping together pieces at a certain point. Another thing I can't quite figure out is how to go from a 4x2 to a 4x4 to a 4x2 and get the texturing right, because your texture map is going to split in 2 and your map, yeah, that's clear. Like Bodhi is saying, you can hide the seam with a beam, right? That's where the beams come into place. That's usually how it's done. Sometimes you can get away with like a little bit of scaling, right? But if you go from like 4 meters to 2 meters, you're doing too much scaling. Sometimes you can kind of work around with it in like the texturing way, where like each seam, right? Let's say 1 meter seam on your texture kind of always looks like relatively generic, so that even if you were to match them with like another generic piece, like the difference is not that big, right? But I think like the beam is definitely like the way to go, right? So like these additional details, like they're also gonna help you like cover seams and gaps as well, right? Because sometimes you just have like gaps in your modular kit. Not often, but especially if you're working with like more a more organic modular kit, let's call it that, right? With like more variation in it, you can introduce some gaps that you can then try to clear with those beams as well. Awesome. Yeah, I think that's it. A lot of modular nerdy talk, but yeah, you got this. You can break everything down in modularity, right? It's just with some cases, not in this case, right? Some cases it's not worthwhile doing it. Decals can help as well. Yeah, they can kind of help you smudge up like some of the places. Yeah, but honestly, most of the time it's a pillar, right? There are other options. Like sometimes what they'll have is like a world line texture, right? Where you don't have to worry about like the tiling because the tiling is done based on the world. I would not recommend doing that. I would honestly just go for like the more in your face approach by just having like a pillar, right? Or something else to cover it up. You can have pillars, foliage, like anything, right? Cool. Thank you, Pyro. Thank you for sharing your work. Honestly, yeah, a good choice of concept, right? It sent me off into this crazy medieval thing that I was doing, or I am doing. I haven't done in a while. So yeah, good choice of concept, you know? I'm not biased at all. I'm looking forward to this. I'm gonna follow this one for sure, so keep it up. Keep me updated. Awesome. Thank you very much for your time and all the amazing feedback. No worries. Happy to help. Oh, dang. I scrambled them. Sunny. I'm gonna go with Sunny next. Let's see. Whole bunch of text. I adjusted the camera so it looked like a character was standing. Do you think the camera angle is better? Yep. Camera angle is better. We're looking at this one specifically, right? I feel like we're really getting like the grandeur. We're really getting the grandeur of the scene, right? We're looking up, like it's giving us this like forced perspective that this is like towering over us. Gonna look interesting. I don't know why I scaled them up like this. It should honestly be the opposite way around, but here we are. So yeah, do it like this instead. So that's looking good. I built this castle by referencing many images of castles and houses in the Middle East. Oh god. As well as referencing the Assassin's Creed Mirage, right? Hoping to receive some feedbacks from you about my own castles in terms of art. I want to create my own castle. Okay. Again, really ambitious. I can't give you any feedback on that, honestly, without seeing like the references that you've taken. Because I have no clue, right? Like, if you want to have some feedback on that, I want to see references, right? So for castle feedback, we need references. Cool. And also I have a technical question. In the process of learning about tiling applications for modular assets, in addition to adjusting UVs to avoid seams, this is kind of what we were talking about just now, using a world position shader, or like triplanar, can help solve the seam problem without having to worry about UVs. Will this save even more time for the artist? There's a bunch of questions here. It can save like a lot of time for the artist, right? But it comes at a performance cost. That's the issue with like a triplanar. Because in simple terms, right? I'm also not a tech artist. Is that what you're doing is you're taking your texture 3 times and you're projecting it onto an object like from all angles, right? So this is gonna like drastically increase the amount of textures that you're sampling, right? Very simple terms. So I would not recommend it in a bunch of cases. In this case, I would only use vertex paint and just like multiple textures. Keep it very simple. we oftentimes like to really make it complex for ourselves, where a lot of really visually really good looking stuff can be achieved in very simple ways. So just multiple textures, right? So multiple textures plus vertex paint. It's gonna be all you need for this environment. You can make that work. If you want to do details, you can add trim sheets and all that kind of stuff on top of it, right? You're gonna need those things as well. But especially if you're looking at Assassin's Creed Mirage, look at how they built up their stuff. Because it is honestly just mostly tilables and trim sheets, right? Where they have like really beautiful, these beautiful carved ornaments, right? Those are all trim sheets, right? That's just like a bunch of trim sheets that they just use on objects, and then they have like tilables that they blend it with. So you've got some really good inspiration there. I would just look at it from that side as well. Let's see. Because there were some more questions, right? So is a world position shader used a lot in games? Not a lot. I would not go as far as calling it a lot. I think in performance cost it will be significantly more expensive. Yep. Anyways, is traditional UV better to choose than triplanar? Yes. During this time, I spent a lot of learning about performance optimization, finding a better choice between different options. Okay, that's really interesting that you do that, Sonny. And I know we've talked about a lot of technical stuff here, right? But I'm gonna be honest, focus on the art before you go into the technical stuff, right? It's always way easier to make something more performant than it is to make it look really pretty, right? Especially to the degree that we're gonna do it, right? Like the differences that we make compared to what a tech artist can make on like a grand scale is gonna be totally different. I'm not calling out like any tech artist that their job is gonna be like way easier, but just in terms of like what we are doing and what we should be focusing on as like environment artists is focus on the art rather than on the tech, right? And again, it has to do with like making it more complex than it needs to be sometimes, right? Like just do the most simple approach and start building up from there, especially because this is your first environment too, right? Make it simple, make it approachable, set yourself up for success. But I realize that the knowledge I need to learn about 3D environment creation is really vast. Yes, that's why I'm saying, right? Make it really simple, dumb it down to the basics, and then build up from there. Yeah. Making good progress here, though. I like what I'm seeing. Next time, share those references so that we can talk about like the approaches and what kind of styles you want to blend, right? Generally, again, first environment, I don't want to sound like a what do they call that? Like a broken trumpet? God damn it. I have no idea what kind of thing I was trying to say there. But what it comes down to is I wouldn't recommend someone to try to already build a lot of stuff from scratch, right? I know that the urge is there. I know it. But it's way easier to just stick with one thing and do it properly rather than getting really confused by trying to design things yourself. Talked about that a lot, so I'm gonna kind of keep it there. Yeah, if you want to talk about that, share some references and then we can definitely talk about it. Thanks, Sonny. Nice little update. Looking forward to the next one. Who is next? We got Maya next. Not much progress this week. Managed to add a few new details. Cool. My main questions are the stickers a good idea or are they too much? Stickers? Oh, on the side of the coffee machine. I don't mind them. Cool. Sorry, I'm petting Nacho here on the side as well. He's asking for some attention. Okay, so stickers, they can be a good idea. Yeah, they're not distracting, especially where they are now. So stickers, dink, good. Let me see what's on them. Like, just be careful about the amount of them, right? If you want me to give like any feedback on that, because also what happens with these kind of elements, right, is that they kind of look forced if they're just like really placed densely in like one area, right? But just maybe add like a couple less and just have them like slightly skewed and like misplaced and all that kind of stuff, right? It's not perfect. So less and imperfect. Next question. I've noticed that my glass material doesn't look good. Yes. It's a common issue. Any tips on making good glass materials in Substance Painter? In Substance Painter, no. Because most of the glass and how it reacts actually is done in the engine or the program that you're gonna be setting it up for the render, right? So I think you're using Marmoset, right? So you will have to look at like how to make glass look really good inside of Marmoset instead, rather than making it look good in Painter. Basically with glass, all the stuff that you need to do in Painter is really simple. You just have like a little bit of a dirt map on it, right? Where you kind of has like splashes and like any kind of dirt that you want. And the rest of it is mostly gonna be inside of Marmoset, honestly. For example, in Unreal Engine, you have to look at like getting high quality reflections, making sure that you got like some sort of like reflection that is being bounced, right? Like either with like an HDRI or having it capture your environment. There's also like a bunch of shader options where you want your reflections to be per pixel rather than something else. You also need to look into volumetric, translucent shadowing, all that kind of nerdy stuff, right? Those options are going to be completely different in Marmoset, and I kind of have no clue about Marmoset when it comes to that. So I would just look at tutorials on how to set up glass, because that's going to be what you're looking for currently. And then number 3, I have the same problem with my wood texture. Do you think it's better to make a custom wood material and stick to the presets and free online textures? Oh, so currently you're sticking with like online sources, right, for these materials? I would honestly give it a try to make your own material. There are really cool tricks when it comes to making wood grain inside of Substance Painter and also Substance Designer that are really interesting to look into. But I would definitely go and like try to make your own materials. That doesn't mean that everything in your scene needs to be made by you, right? But I would definitely dip your toes into it. And especially for something that is a little bit more dependent on maybe like a little bit of like wear and tear on the edges and all that kind of stuff, right? Try to do your own thing. And build it up in layers. Or like think in layers. That's probably a better way. Again, a very generic advice. But what usually helps is having the base layer of wood, then having some sort of like scratching on top of it, then having like another layer of scratching, having dust, having, you know, like you want to think in like, okay, what if I were to leave out like something on my desk? Like what is going to affect that over time? Right? think about that in those ways. Yeah, definitely. I suppose it's a question of how much time I have left in my project, but do you have any advice? Yeah, I would definitely try to make your own materials, for sure. It's still like a core component, right? I'm not an expert with those wooden things in the kitchen, but shouldn't those be like 2 separate parts? Which one? Like the little plate on the side? Bodhi? Like this thing? Not really sure. But yeah, I would definitely give it a try, making it yourself. Oh, the thing that it stands on? Like the top, the wooden top, you mean? Right? Like in the corner, you mean? You usually have like some sort of split, right? That kind of goes. It could be. It kind of depends. Like you can have like solid wood as well, where they just like make it out of in one shape. You can have ones that are like kind of glued together as well. It kind of depends a little bit. I think it's a good thing that you bring up, Bodhi. The thing that I always have to take into account is I'm trying to temper it around like the person's current skill set, right? So I'm kind of thinking about that. And I think it's worthwhile to focus on making your own materials first, and then thinking about like all those like beautiful things that you brought up, right? Like how something is manufactured, all that kind of stuff. But you're definitely right. You're definitely right. That can make a nice little detail, right? Especially because it's going to be in like the middle of the scene. Like just having like, I'm gonna add it anyway, right? And then we'll let them decide what they're gonna do with it. Like a manufactured seam, right? Cool. Does need a little bit more work with the lighting and the right HDRI. Yeah, for sure. But you're working on it. You're working on it. Making some really good progress, though. I like what I'm seeing. Massive improvements over the last time. It's not looking flat anymore, which is freaking awesome. I like the shadows. I like the current lighting that's in it. I would still try to give it like a spin where like the light comes from like the outside, like shining in, right? Be really nice. But I'll leave that up to you. You're still working on it. So thank you for sharing the update, Maya. Looking forward to the next update. And then we got Bodhi. Let's see. What are some of the questions that you have for us, Bodhi? Change the composition again, because I felt like it was missing without a close foreground. Yes. Like it. I see some good choices. I like it. Yeah. Gonna head out now. Have a nice evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, McVal. Appreciate it, as always. Yes. Some good stuff is happening to Bodhi. I like what I'm seeing. Let's see. Were there any questions? Camera doubled the height of a person. With the new one, there's almost... Again, almost a straight path to the tower. Maybe I'll try to pull back the camera even more to try to fix him. I don't think it's that bad of a thing now, though. Because we kind of have this nice curve, right? Especially in this one. So maybe... I don't really mind it in this one either, though. Like, the reason why I don't mind it, and think about what we talked about last time, right? Is last time you had If I remember this correctly, right? I'm gonna do like a very simple representation of your scene, right? So last time we kind of had like the tower, let's say the tower here, right? And then your path was kind of starting here and it kind of went that way, right? Something like that. What we have now though is like completely different, right? Because we're going from like one edge and we're going all the way to like nice rule of thirds, right? Feels way better than the way that you had it before. Because now our eyes need to travel much further, right? And we're kind of being guided really nicely as well. Plus we kind of have like this character here looking really nice. So connection there. Got some leading lines going that way as well. So really, really nice improvements. The main thing that I will say is that I like the foreground here, but it's too close to the tower. Especially this part, right? Like in this part, maybe. So what I would look at is maybe like moving those edges. Especially when it doesn't really overlap with like the tower itself, right? You can probably rotate the bushes, something like that, to get really specific about it. So foreground bush intersects with tower, right? It's not really so great at the moment, but that's an easy fix, you know. Easy fix. Let's see. Maybe I'll try to pull back the camera more and try to mix them. And I feel that the tower would be too small. Yeah, I don't. You could try. The best thing you could do is try, right? Like give it a try, see what you have, and then compare them for yourself, and that's gonna make a huge difference as well. Because sometimes it's hard to imagine things, right? Especially for me trying to give feedback. Yeah, I don't mind even if the tower would be small or smaller, right? Because the tower is such a strong silhouette against everything else in the scene. I don't think it's gonna get lost, even if it was like relatively tiny, right? I don't think it's gonna be that big of an issue. That's my gut feeling there. Also, should I just remove the grass in front of the tower to give it more room to rest the eye? No, I don't think that's too distracting, the grass, honestly. I don't mind. What do you think is the better composition? So this is where it gets interesting, right? I feel that currently the top one is my favorite because we have strong foreground elements, right? Where the bottom one doesn't really have that currently. You could still incorporate them into it, right? But I feel that like the top one is currently my favorite. If there is this thing with this one where I feel really awkward about this space here. I kind of want to see like more of the cliff, right? Like more of the cliff, and like I want to see more of like the open space beneath it if this is going to be your composition of choice, right? Like I kind of want to have, what would it be? Oh, if we do like a little sketch here, like it would almost be like in the cliff is like almost at like the rule of third points, right? And then maybe it's gonna be really awkward because I freaking love like the rule of thirds, right? Like having your tower in like the center of the frame rather than on the rule of thirds, so that you can have like your little cutaway here. That's maybe what I would try if we're gonna stick with a composition like this instead. That we can have like a more grander feel, right? Feels like I'm pretty far away. This is what Bulborb is saying. Feels like I'm pretty far away from the focal point and missing out on the small details of the tower. Yeah, but those small details don't really matter for the main shot, right? What you could do is then, oh, and I'm gonna give you a sweet tip for this, Bodhi. What you then could do, if you do like a breakdown, you get really close to the tower and you have a vertical shot that's divided with 2 or multiple images. So you take landscape images, but you take them in a way where they make like a full page ArtStation shot with 2 images, where you can have like the whole tower. I just like that. So basically you just have like your whole tower like separated a bit. That would be it, right? Yeah, I totally understand the technology. Yeah. This is also a challenge that I faced when I was doing the ArtStation challenge too, because I had to present like a massive floating tower in the middle of 2 massive mountains. It was really challenging. I decided to go for like a really wide angle. Maybe it was better if I had like the knowledge that I have now, but yeah. You could present it in this way, but I would still keep like the main shot, like landscape, right? And then do this kind of stuff as like an, I don't know, a nice breakdown shot or something like that, right? Where people can really like see like all the details that you put into the tower. Because this is one of those cases where I feel like it's not really worth destroying the scene's composition just because you want to make sure that people can see the beautiful things that you put on the tower, right? We can do that in like additional shots, but I feel like you have a really strong main composition. Cool. Secondly, I want to have feedback on the plants. I'm quite happy with the ivy. I'll add more variations later, but I've been struggling with the grass for some time. First instinct, at this distance, I don't care, because I can't see it. Right? So that's like genuine first instinct. And when it comes to the grass, like, I don't care. At this distance, it looks like good enough. It looks like grass. And that's all I care about, right? If you wanted to do, let's see. I use Quixel textures, but it looks really bad. So this is the thing, right? Like if you wanted to show them off and they were your own textures, then I would be talking about it in a different way. But these are using Quixel textures, so you're probably not going to show them in your breakdown anyway. So I kind of wouldn't care. Right? Because it does the job at a distance that we're looking at it right now. Let's see, the big one are cards, the small ones are dry grass on the floor, single strands in the clump. Also, you know what I can do about dark shadows in the bushes with bigger leaves? I'm quite confused by all the shader options. Thanks for reading the text and all the feedback. Yeah. So the grass, I don't mind, right? I thought they are too dark, or I don't know, there's something that doesn't feel right. I don't mind, honestly. The grass, right? We're still talking about the grass. I don't have an issue with the grass at all. When it comes to, you were bringing up some of the other stuff, right? Maybe some of these things. The grass looks fine. This stuff, maybe you would expect like a little bit of translucency there, right? But again, from a distance, like I don't mind too much, right? There are really genius ways to get around this, and I saw a person doing this like using the dither node, where he could basically using the dither to make like foliage like more transparent or not, but I lost the link. I've implemented it into my own shader, so I'll have to dig it up because I have no clue how it works again, right? It's been a couple of months since I looked at my own project, so But there are like really cool things that you can do with like the ditto node, especially when it comes to like faking the how opaque or not like a surface is, especially good for foliage, to let more light in, right? Because I too have that feeling too when I'm like in the middle of my forest that I created. Like it feels way too dark, like it's not letting enough sunlight in. So yeah, I'll need to look that up. So I can't give you like any accurate feedback on this here. But the grass feels fine. The other things, yeah. Dark shadows, the bushes with the bigger leaves. Yeah. I'm sure you're gonna find something. It was on Twitter, right? So I don't know the searchability of it, but let me look it up real quick. So nope, not it. I'm not gonna find this easily, I think. The Ultimate Foliage Guide in Unreal Engine 5. This looks interesting. Let's have a quick browse. Pixel Bridge, Nanite, LOD settings, culling, texture optimizations. Virtual texture, shadow cache. Oh, is it gonna talk about like the... oh, shadow cache. Oh. Okay. That's not the tip that I was looking for, so I'll have to look it up. That tip looked interesting though, like disabling the shadow cache. Right. No, but great stuff. I like to do compositions. I would also try, like last tip here, go for wider angles, right? Try to play around with that. I think that could be a way to include like maybe more of the road that you wanted to include, right? Like giving yourself like more screen space to do stuff in. Yeah, I'm just a big sucker for like really cinematic widescreen angles, so that's my personal thing coming in here. Cool, yeah, and I'll look after the stream, like, well, in a couple of days to see if I can find like the shadow solution. Last thing here, because we're running way over time, I didn't even realize, is from Thomas. Thomas is new. Oh, Thomas. So far created one asset, but it's a big one. Cool. Questions. More specifically, looking for tips on how to make a jump from height field generated landscape mesh to something that looks good up close. Already played around. It's okay from far. Blah 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 blah. I feel like I need quite a bit of rock formations, rocks, gravel. Yeah. Yeah, honestly, like if you wanna get like really up close and detailed like this, there's only like one thing you can do when it comes to actually adding more details, right? Is you can get away with like a base terrain, but your base is always gonna require like some separate meshes. Right, so usually you can have like bigger rocks. And then you got smaller rocks, right? Small rocks and then pebbles, right? Just to give you like a nice transition between all of it. For details, like having, especially for you, giant tire tracks, right? You're gonna require those as well. Yeah, honestly, this is what usually happens, right? You have like a really solid base terrain, and then you just have to layer it up with unique meshes on top of it to make it look good. So yeah. There's all kinds of ways where you can kind of work around it now, right? I don't know if you're presenting this in Unreal or not. Oh god. God, I skipped ahead to the second question. That's gonna be interesting. Let's see. Yeah. I have no clue if this is gonna be in like Unreal Engine, but like there's usually like a lot of procedural tools. Like procedural scattering tools specifically, right? You can do this in Blender, you can do this in Unreal. Just to help you scatter like a lot of assets over like a big distance, right? So it's something to definitely look into. In Unreal, you got PCG, even though I haven't touched it yet. Just in Blender at the moment, looking to bring it into Unreal soon. Yeah, so PCG you can use for that. You can also use grass types, as weird as that sound. But a grass type basically layers what you... It basically samples what you paint as your terrain layer, and then just scatters like a whole bunch of grass on it, right? But you can plug any mesh into it. So you can add like rocks, pebbles, all that kind of stuff. Helps you scatter like a lot of things. That can be really helpful. God, there was... So in the first Unreal Engine 5 demo, there was a concept called... I think it's called Mega Assemblies. Look into those. If you're interested in working with Nanite, which I generally don't recommend for game dev at this point, but still, if you want to work with that, you can look into it. But basically what they do is they step away from using like height map based terrain at all, and they just have like all meshes, all geo. Kind of a crazy concept, but it was also like more of a tech demo, right? So keep that into account. But yeah, that's what I would look into. Grass types is definitely like the easiest thing to get into because it's relatively simple to set up. PCG is more like node based, so you're gonna have to do like node based setup. Kind of think like geometry nodes in Blender. But yeah. That would definitely be like the thing to look into if you want to scatter like all that stuff. And then number 3 is the large truck is close to being done. I'm not going to recreate the whole thing, but if I recreate an asset on a similar scale in the future, it would probably be smarter to use a trim sheet and tidables, right? Treat it more like a building. Yes. I textured the current version in Substance, but it required like 28 UDIMs at 4K. Oh god. This is giving me a heart attack. 28 UDIMs at 4K to at least look decent. It doesn't seem very economical to me. No, straight to the point. If you're gonna do this in game dev, like your asset is not gonna get into the game. Generally in games, we don't use UDIMs at all, right? We use multiple texture sets, but we don't scale that up to like a more VFX appropriate workflow where you use UDIMs, right? 28 4Ks is crazy for game dev, right? Because we have to render all this stuff at like 60 frames a second, like always, right? You're taking into, yeah, you're taking a lot of memory into account. So what you were saying, right, is next time build this with tilables and with trim sheets. 100% agree. And what you then do is you can have additional techniques on top of that to then give you the detail and the variation that you would otherwise get from a UDIM or like all the texture sets that you're working with, right? So like all the rust and all that kind of stuff, that is just like a tileable rust that you would then paint on top of the object, right? Or you can do that with like masks and all that kind of stuff. There's ways around it. So yeah, definitely do that next time, especially if you want to get into game art, right? Gonna be very, very direct for a second, right? Like if, I know this is not going to be your only project, right? But let's assume that you are applying with this as your only project on your portfolio. Then you probably trying to think about situations where you could get in. I don't think there would be any, because it is the core understanding of how to work with like really like in a really memory restricted and budget restricted environment, right? That's what makes games unique compared to VFX. So I would definitely take that into account for the next project, right? This project still shows that you can do like really impressive vehicles, you can still make them look good, all that kind of stuff. So I'm not trying to say that it has no value, but for games, it's going to be like a massive hurdle to get over if you don't show those skills. So yeah, take that into account next time. And like you said, especially at this scale, it is a building, right? So kind of treat it as a building. That's perfect. Yes, so I'm gonna give you some keywords, right? So trim sheets, definitely on the right track. 100% agree. Second UV workflow. This is a little bit confusing because this is oftentimes also called RGB masking. That's also like a technique that is oftentimes used on top of trim sheet, where you basically still do like an 0 to 1 UV, right? That has like your entire object in it at like a lower resolution. And then you bake out like masks inside of Substance Painter. And then you pack them into like an RGB. So your red channel would have one mask, like black and white. Your green channel would have one mask, black and white data, right, for your texture. Yeah. So, but I'm gonna give you some keywords that you can look up. When you go into like more sci-fi technical things, have a look into the mid-poly workflow as well. This is the workflow that is used for big ships in Star Citizen. It's also used in like all the technical environments from Doom, right? Like the very sci-fi technical environments like Doom. And it kind of also riffs on like the it can potentially riff off some of the things that we talked about just now. But usually how this works is you have your base material, your base geometry that has like a tileable on top of it. And then the way that they add details on top of it is by having a decal sheet. Or like a decal atlas, if we want to be specific. And this is basically just like a collection of little greebles and bits that you can just like add on top of like your... that you can basically cut out into individual bits of geometry and then paste on top of your base geometry. So we're kind of working with like, again, like a different approach, right? but still a very interesting one if you want to have like lots of mechanical details on like a surface like yours, for example. Yeah. Again, very generic stuff here, right? I just want to give you like some key points that you can kind of look up on YouTube or on Polycount or wherever you can find the information. When it comes to some of these techniques, like trim sheets and all that, we also have workshops on those topics as well. So go check those out. But yeah, I'm kind of giving you like just the info, and then you'll have to soak it in, right, for your next project. Yeah, looking killer though. I like the visuals of the vehicle itself, right? Very imposing vehicle, looks very nice. I like the approach of the texturing as well. Feels very contextual already. So yeah, I think the art itself is good, right? It's just making it game ready. That's gonna be like the next portfolio project. Awesome. Thank you for joining us, by the way, Thomas, and thank you for posting your work. It's awesome to have you here, and I hope that was helpful. Awesome. Yeah, it's plenty to get me started. Amazing, man. Great work. Shout out to all the rest of the people that participated in this episode of Whip Wednesday. Appreciate it all. Like I was saying before, for people that are just getting into like game art, go to our website, go check out our other workshops and our other content on YouTube. There's a lot of it. But I'm not going to take my leave because we've been streaming for like an hour longer than usual. So a little bit over time. Thank you all so much for being here. I wish you a pleasant evening, day, wherever you may be. And we'll see each other in the next one.